Hey guys, so we're going to cover animal ecology in this video for week 2 of the class, and then we're also going to cover animal behavior is the next topic for this week. So let's get started on animal ecology. So the first thing we have to learn is the levels of organization. If you have had a bio class before this, I hope you have. But if you have not, we are going to start at the basics, the smallest stuff. So that's going to be the chemical level. This image is from OpenStax, so I have stolen it and used it because they have some really great information. It's all free. But they break it down into really small stuff like atoms, and then we put atoms together and we make molecules. So I'm just going to lump all of this as the chemical level of organization. And at this level, it is very, very small, even if we're building up from smaller molecules like CO2 all the way up to larger molecules like carbohydrates and polysaccharides and that kind of stuff. Those are the chemical level. And then we have organelles. Those are things inside of a cell like mitochondria or nucleus. And then we have the cell itself. So cellular level is where it's at as far as this is the smallest level of organization that has all the properties of life. And properties of life would be, can it sense its environment? Is it able to reproduce? Can it grow? All sorts of things that are involved with being alive. That happens at the cellular level. When we mentioned the tree of life before and the 3 domains and viruses weren't on there because they cannot follow all of the properties of life, they only have some of them. But if you're at the cellular level, whether you are a unicellular organism like a bacteria or a multicellular organism like you and I are, cellular level is the fundamental unit of life, the smallest level where all the properties of life are carried out. And there are prokaryotes and eukaryotes, so we talked about before, where prokaryotes are going to have non-membrane bound organelles. They're going to have DNA, but they're not going to have it wrapped up inside of the nucleus like we do. While eukaryotes do, we have a membrane bound nucleus. So we are eukaryotes. Then we're going to go up a little bit higher and we're going to go to the tissue level. On the tissue level, so tissue is going to be made up of different types of cells. So if we were talking about, we're going to get into this again when we get into the kind of anatomy and physiology chapter topic later. But tissues are going to be different types of cells in tissue. So if we're talking about muscle tissue, they're all forming a specific job. So this could be epithelial tissue, connective tissue, neurons in your nervous system. Those are different types of tissue. And then we have the organs. So different tissues will make up an organ. So if we were talking about the heart, for example, the heart is going to be made out of epithelial tissue. That's going to be the lining that lines your blood vessels. It's going to line the inside of the heart. If somebody has endocarditis, which I want to say is a possible side effect of COVID, that's the lining of your heart, and that can be infected just like the muscle of your heart. So you're going to have a lining of the heart, you're going to have a muscle, cardiac muscle tissue that beats and pumps the heart, and then you're going to have an outside layer of the heart too. So you're going to have 3 different layers of tissue, and they all make up that one organ. And so after organs, we're going to have organ systems. So the whole cardiovascular system. And the cardiovascular system would include the heart. It also includes the vasculature, your arteries and veins, and it's going to include the blood, which is the whole point of your cardiovascular system, is to transport stuff in the blood. So all of those together would be organ systems. So we're getting more and more complicated as we go up these levels of organization. And then after we have a whole bunch of different organ systems put together, that makes up an organism. So you and I, we are multicellular organisms. We are complicated. And because we are large multicellular organisms, we have developed organ systems. We have a cardiovascular system. We have a respiratory system. We have a digestive system. I could go on and on. But that makes up an organism. And again, sometimes an organism is just a unicellular bacteria like staph. But it could be a multicellular organism too. And that multicellular organism may need to be complicated and have up different systems that specify its basic needs. Okay, so after organisms, we have populations. populations are going to be a population of a species, a specific thing. So a population of people, a population of humans on the Cartersville campus, for example, a population of students on the Cartersville campus, of Georgia Highland students, or maybe just the population that lives in Cartersville, the human population. But if we were going to talk about um, the populations of people and maybe their dogs and their cats and their pets and the animals around them, then we would be looking for communities, which I have covered up with my pin mark. But communities would be the next level. So it's going to be all the organisms living in a particular ecosystem. So if I was looking, I'm here at my house, but if I was looking outside the window, it would be, me and my family and all the humans around us and the trees and the birds in the trees, and the grass and the bugs and stuff living in the grass, all that stuff would be the community. And then we can go up higher and we can go to ecosystem. So in ecology and ecosystem, we are going to talk about all of the living stuff, all the stuff I just named, plants, animals, all that stuff interacting, but also it includes the non-living components, the physical stuff that the organisms interact with. So the sunshine that comes down, that irradiates the plants, and the plants take up that energy and use it for photosynthesis. How does that energy cycle go through? How does the carbon cycle go through? The nitrogen cycle, sulfur cycle, all of that stuff, that would be considered non-living thing, and that is involved in the ecosystem. And then if we put all the different ecosystems together, then we have the biggest level that you can possibly get, and that is biosphere. So that's the whole earth and everything happening in the earth, the non-living stuff interacting with the living stuff, all of it together. So biosphere is the highest you can go. On these levels, I'm going to need you to know these levels and know what is the biggest, most inclusive biosphere and what is the most exclusive, tiniest stuff, just like we had to know with genus and species all the way up to kingdom and domain. The same thing with the levels. So be able to put the levels in order, either smallest to biggest or biggest to smallest. But I always ask that on a test question. So know your levels and what they mean, because you have maybe a question that's just describing a community and you need to know what I'm talking about. So know your levels. They're always going to be on the test. All right, so other terminology. What is ecology? We were just saying it. So it's how the living organic stuff interacts with the non-living inorganic stuff in its environment. And the main point, we want to understand how those things interact. And we also have other terms here on this side, and it's talking about environments. When we're talking about that environment, what is that environment consist of? Is it homogeneous? Is it heterogeneous? Homo means the same and hetero means different. So homogeneous environment. Here we have a picture of a palm plantation. And so the farmers came along and they are obviously farming palm for the oil, or maybe heart of palms. But they have everything. It's a homogeneous environment. Everything, it's nothing but palm trees as far as the eye can see. And then we have over here a jungle, a rainforest in Madagascar, and it is a heterogeneous environment. So hetero is different. So when you think about the environments, where are you going to find more species? Are you going to find more species in a homogeneous environment where everything's the same? Like if we were in face-to-face in Cartersville, like we would be for lab. If we looked out of our classroom and we looked out onto the grassy landscape of the Cartersville campus, are we going to find more plants and animals on that grassy lawn, or are we going to find more plants and animals if we wandered into the woods right next to the campus buildings to see there? Where there's a little bit of water and a variation in the environment, where are you going to find more species? So that type of environment matters. Is it a homogeneous environment where everything is the same? Whether that is a palm plantation, or if you went further south, there's property out there for Georgia Power and it's all pine trees. So what type of environment? Is it homogeneous? Is it heterogeneous? Is it all the same, or is it different? You're going to have more diversity in a heterogeneous environment where you've got lots of different niches that we're going to go and talk about. So with niches, that is going to be what that animal needs, a specific need that is solved by that area, whether that is what the animal feeds on or how it reproduces. Um, that is what it does in an environment. So um, we have this theory called the competitive exclusion principle, and it says that no two species can occupy the same niche or niche, however you want to pronounce it, at the same time. And so we had these warblers in the same tree, and there's multiple different types of warblers in the tree, and we're like, hold up, we said that you can only have um, one thing, actually, if you're in that environment, in that one niche, only one of these guys is supposed to like come out on top. But it turns out that these guys are all using different parts of the tree. Like this guy is way up near the top, and this guy is going to be closer to the bottom, and the trunk, this guy's exclusively on the bottom. So they're all in different parts of the tree and using the tree for different things, whether they're just hanging out there to find a mate. Maybe they like to just get the new growth on the tips of the ends of the branches and they're not hanging out near the trunk. But these guys are in different places because the competitive exclusion principle is going to show us that they cannot occupy the exact same niche. So here are an example to demonstrate the competitive exclusion principle, and we have paramecium. Paramecium are these cute little unicellular little guys covered in cilia, and I think they look kind of cute. So there's two of them. There's Paramecium aurelia and there's Paramecium caudatum. And when they're alone in their environment, they are cool. They're growing really well, and that you can see they both grow, and their population gets pretty strong when they're solo. What if we had to stick these guys in the same environment when they're both grown together in the same environment? They don't both flourish like they did individually. One of them is going to outcompete the other. So the competitor is going to exclude the other guy out. And in this case, who was it? It was Aurelia. Aurelia wins while Caudatum suffers because you can't have two things occupying the exact same niche, whatever that niche might be. All right, so we're going to switch gears and bump into populations. So populations, we said, were going to be a population of a single species. They must be reproductively interactive. So a group of individuals that can interact amongst each other and reproduce amongst each other is a population. So reproductive interactive groups. Deans are going to be isolated groups. So in this example, we have a brown trout, and brown trout are really common, but sometimes they are isolated. And so the example in our outlines were the brown trout, excuse me, the brown trout that we find here in Georgia, but there are also brown trout over in Europe. And so these guys are the same species, but they are definitely isolated, and maybe given enough time, they will not be able to come back together and reproduce if they needed to. But right now, these guys are isolated. They're isolated. They are different teams of a population of brown trout. Will they lead to a new species? It it's possible, maybe. I have an article here. I think I was telling y'all before. Please watch these videos and click on these articles. They help reinforce topics that we are talking about. But last spring when I was teaching this article had just come out about the Sierra red fox, where there are red foxes everywhere. They're really common. Like we have red foxes in all over Canton, Cartersville. They're everywhere, and they're out west too. But up in the Sierras, it's a isolated population, a team of red foxes. And will it make its own speciation? Was debated. Is there enough individuals within this population to sustain itself? So it was a relatively recent article about the red fox that I thought was kind of cool. So I wanted to share with y'all. Here we have all different types of salamanders, and these guys have been isolated, and you can see that they are isolated again by the Sierras, by the Rockies that are running through California, and they are all different. This guy's over here and this guy's over here. They're isolated. So eventually they might lead to new species because they will eventually change to match their environment through natural selection. Island biogeography. So that is going to look at factors that are going to affect how many species there are, the species richness of an area. When we have these isolated natural communities, like we were talking about, Madagascar is an isolated island. What is affecting this island biogeography? So here we have a population of beetles in this picture, and these are on the mainland, and this red beetle got blown away in a hurricane or whatever, something happened, a storm came along, blew this beetle away, landed on the island. And does this island reflect what's happening on the mainland? On the mainland, we have red ones and we have yellow ones, but on the island, we only have red ones. So this is called the founder effect, where you just have this one small group of individuals, and they come and they are the founders of the island, and the whole island's population is based off the genetic material of those founders. That's the founder effect, and island biogeography, that impacts it. Other things that impact populations is obviously extinction. That is going to terminate all of it for that population. And oftentimes, extinction can be due to us, due to man made extinctions. We definitely have a significant impact on this earth. And these are just a few of the ones that we have kept track of. Obviously, we haven't categorized all the species that we that are here. We don't know everything that's out there. We haven't categorized it. We haven't named everything that's out there. But what we do know of are listed here. These are just a few examples of the things that people have caused to go extinct. And that's the dodo bird. These guys were hunted to extinction. They were on land and they tasted really good. And so we hunted them until there wasn't any more. They couldn't get away. They were these flightless little birds, not necessarily little. They were pretty decent size, but they were flightless, and we hunted them to extinction. Stellar sea cow is very similar to the manatee of today, and that is also something that we hunted to extinction. Passenger pigeons, those guys were crazy. We had them all over North America when we were first settling North America 200 years ago. These guys were so dark in the sky. When a flock of passenger pigeons went overhead, it was said to block out the sun. There were millions of these things in the sky, and we hunted those bad boys, and we caught so much of them that we were selling them to other friends. We were putting them across straight lines. We were selling them to anybody who would buy them, because there's so many of these things that there's no way that we will make a dent in these things. Because I mean, look, there's so many of them. They're just laying on top of each other, on top of the tree branches, because there's not enough places for them to roost. There's so many passenger pigeons out there. And lo and behold, we kept doing it and hunting them, and to eventually there weren't any more. We decimated their population, and there's not any more passenger pigeons anymore. So lots of different examples. Passenger pigeons. There used to be, I don't have a picture of it here, but we used to have a parakeet in North America. It was a Carolina parakeet, but we don't have that anymore either. So there are quite a bit, so many extinctions that we know about, and oftentimes it's our fault. It's our fault. So there are man-made extinctions, and that would be absolutely the end of that particular species population. The bottleneck effect. So with the bottleneck effect, there's going to be some sort of environmental effect, environmental event. It could be the wildfires like that are ravaging California right now as I'm making this video. The wildfires come through and they just decimate, all the plants down on the ground in this one environment, and there's only a few left. Or it could be the hurricanes that are in the Gulf right now, and there's two of them at the exact same time. And so a hurricane comes along and it decimates a population. But there's some sort of environmental event and it's going to come along, and we can see in this bottle that there are red, no, go back. There are red beads, and there are green beads, and there are yellow beads. There's all sorts of diversity in this bottle. And then the bottleneck effect comes along and it shrinks the diversity found that's left over. And so now we only have green and we have yellow, and we no longer have the red beads. And that's some sort of environmental effect, fires, hurricanes, flash flooding to flood somewhere, whatever it is, something has happened and it has shrunk the diversity. The genetic material is not what it used to be. And so that diversity is less than it used to be, and that gets passed on to future generations. So the less diverse your genetic population is, your population's diversity is, the more likely it is that something could come along and wipe you out. So diversity, genetic diversity, is a big deal. It is why natural selection is a prominent theory, one that all scientists, pretty much all scientists, support. Is that we need that diversity, because the more diverse you are, the more different traits you have, the more likely it is that you will pass on those traits at some point. If your offspring are all identical and everybody has the exact same genes and all the population has the exact same genes, and something comes along, everyone's going to get affected. Everybody will, if they all have the same genes. So this is bottleneck effect. And what it does is it shrinks down the diversity, and it's due to some sort of disaster that has happened, some sort of change, and it reduces the diversity in the environment. Other demography terms. So demography is going to be studying a population. Usually it's usually when you think of demography, we're talking about people. But we will talk about things like sex ratio, male to female sex ratio. What's the survivorship? If the offspring are made, how many offspring are made and how many make it to adulthood? Are there lots of offspring or a little bit of offspring? Do they all make it to adulthood? Or is it very unlikely that the offspring will make it to adulthood? What's the survivorship like? What's the population growth? Are births happening at are births exploding? Or are there very little births happening in a population? These are all things, survivorship, population growth, sex ratio, these are all things that we would study if you're looking at demography. What's going on in that population? So we'll start with survivorship curves first. So we were talking about on survivorship curves, how many offspring do they have, and how likely is it that the offspring will make it to adulthood? And so with type 1 survivorship curves, the number of offspring is low. You and I, people don't have that many offspring at a go. Typically, it's just the one, but sometimes there's more. But the offspring that we do have, especially thanks to medical advances, are very likely to make it to a very old age before our survivorship starts tapering off and we start to die off. It's usually, for us as a human, our survivorship we die from old age. So we are a type 1 example. So not a whole lot of offspring, but the offspring that make it usually make it to adulthood, and then they'll die off at that point. So the opposite, type 3. So type 3 example would be a species that's going to have lots of offspring. They are hedging their bets because the likelihood of those offspring making it to adulthood is very, very slim. Most of those offspring don't make it. So plants are a good example of this. Insects are a good example of this. Not all the insects are going to make it to adulthood. But with these, on a type 3 organism, there's lots of offspring, but not just a rare few actually make it to adulthood and survive to tell the tale as an adult, as a surviving adult. So those are type 3. And then type 2 is right smack in between. The likelihood of you being killed, or the likelihood of you dying, as an example for type 2 is birds. The likelihood of you dying is the same as a youngster as it is as an adult. It's a 50-50 shot. Doesn't matter if you're young or old, if you're a type 2. So they are right smack in the middle for a type 2 survivorship curve. It's a 50-50 shot, whether or not you will pass away as a youngster or as an adult, if you are in the type 2 survivorship curve. So know the different survivorship curves. Know who's an example of the different types. Other terms that are on this sheet. So we have heteroparity and we have similarity. So with heteroparity, that is going to be where an organism, a species, can reproduce multiple times. So that's me and you. We can reproduce more than once. You can have, you may not, you may be an only child, but you may have siblings, and those siblings probably more than likely happened at different points in time. You have an older sister or a younger sister or brother or whatever, because reproduction happened at different points. Female human beings can reproduce at different points throughout their life. There's a finite range, of course, but we can reproduce at multiple times. Similarity, you will see these. We are not similarity. Similarity is going to be this one big event where all of the reproduction happens, and then that's it. That is it. So if anybody can think of examples of those, hopefully y'all can think of examples where this happens. Insects will have a big reproductive run, and then that's it. They've passed on their genes because, again, successful in biologically speaking terms is passing on your genes. So everyone, if you're a certain type of insect, you get together, swap the genes, create new eggs, and you've passed them on, and that's all you need to do, and that's it. That's similarity. Same for salmon. Salmon, and they have their salmon run. So these salmon fry, they hatch from the eggs. They imprint on the stream where they were born. They're going to travel out the stream to the ocean, live their lives, and then when they're ready to reproduce, they will come back to the stream where they were born, and they will have this one big hurrah where they will lay eggs, and then the male will come along and fertilize them. They have created the next generation, and that's it. That's it. So that's similarity, where there's one big event, and then there's heteroparity, and that's us, where you can reproduce at different times throughout your life. Questions about those guys? Let's move on to population growth. So there are two types of population growth. Both of them are going to start with a J curve, and that J curve is what we are seeing with COVID cases, since COVID has come on the scene. But we are talking about population and population numbers, and we could talk about, COVID cases. It's the same kind of curve action, this exponential growth. If we were talking about bacteria growing in a test tube, or if we were talking about introducing a species back into its habitat where it hasn't been in years and years, and that's its first time getting back there, you might see this as exponential growth. So if I have nutrient media and I'm in med micro class, I've got this wonderful tube of nutrient media, and I've got another tube of some stock of E. coli. And I'm going to pull from my stock E. coli. I'm going to pull a little bit. I'm going to dip my loop in. I'm going to pull some little E. coli, and they're going to be stuck at the end of my loop. And then I'm going to put them in to this test tube over here. And this is an empty test tube with nothing but nutrient media in it. And I'm going to put in some new E. coli. And then I'm going to sterilize my loop. And I'm going to put the top on, and I'm going to put it in an incubator and put that E. coli at body temp at 37 and see what happens. Well, you are going to see exponential growth because we have put that bacteria, that E. coli, in an environment where all of its needs are being met right now. And it's going to go like gangbusters. It's just going to grow, 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 grow. And you're going to see the population explode. That is exponential growth. We start down low and it just goes like crazy, straight up. So that's that J curve where you're getting that crazy explosion going up in population numbers. But eventually, and this is true for everything, it's going to hit this right here, this cap. It's going to hit carrying capacity, because even though I have put my E. coli into my new test tube with the nutritional media in there, eventually all of these organisms up here, I got all these E. coli bacteria and they're just going like gangbusters. Eventually they're going to use up the resources in that nutrient tube. They're going to use up all of the available sugars, and then we are going to hit capacity and cells are going to start to die off. Organisms are going to start to die off, because no matter what it is, anywhere on the earth, there's only a finite amount of resources, whether that is food or shelter, reproductive partners, whatever it is, you are going to hit a carrying capacity on that population, whether it's people or fur seals or bacteria. They're going to hit a carrying capacity where that area, that ecosystem can only support so many organisms. When we talk about competition, this is going to be intraspecific within itself. The E. coli are competing against other E. coli for the glucose that is found in this nutrient media. They are going to compete against themselves. They're going to run up against a carrying capacity, and eventually they're going to stop that exponential growth. This is called the J curve, and logistic growth looks more like an S, the S-shaped curve, because it's going to slam up against that carrying capacity and start to curve on over as population growth slows down. Human population growth is still in the J curve phase, but we are hopefully starting to move over into a carrying capacity level. Let's look at that J curve growth. So the number of people on Earth back in the 1800s, we had 1 billion. We had approximately 1 billion people in the 1800s. And then how long did it take to go between 1 billion to 2? How long did it take for that population to double? So between 1 billion and 2 billion, it took 130 years. It wasn't until 1930 to where there were 2 billion people on Earth, 2 billion humans. And then to go from 2 to 3, it was only 30 years. So it went from 130 years to make another billion people to only 30 years to make another billion people. And then we're at 4 billion people by 1975. So now it's half, it's 15 years. And then 87 is at 5 billion, 99. So you can see, 130, 30, 15, 12, 12. And then it's starting to finally space out a bit. 13, we're estimating at 2028, it would be roughly about 16 years before we go from 7 to 8 billion. And then hopefully it will start to spread out even more. So as we have advanced in things like birth control in developed nations, we can slow down that population growth and be more effective at caring for the humans that we have. So we are reaching carrying capacity. The earth can only support so many people. And so as nations are developing and being able to control populations in a healthy way, human population growth is slowing down. But for a while there, this was some crazy growth, some J curve, some exponential growth going on. Sex ratio, the ratio of males to females, it matters. You have to have both to be able to reproduce, right? In this video, they were talking about clownfish and how their sex ratio is really skewed. Like they'll only have one female and everyone else is male. But clownfish are really also cool because even if they only have the one female, Clownfish are born with their reproductive tissues for both male and female. They have both tissue types, and depending on what hormones are released, they can develop into either a male or a female. So because they have that ability, they can have very, very skewed ratios. And if you pulled out the one dominant larger female, like they talk about in this video, the next largest male in the tank will release the hormones and switch from being a male and develop into the dominant female of the group. So clownfish have a very, very skewed sex ratio, male to female, but the fact that they can switch their tissues between male and female helps them out. Sea turtles have this kind of tissue type when they are developing. So depending on the temperature and the environment where the eggs are laid, depending on that temperature, it will either produce more females or more males. And in this example, it's talking about how climate change is warming up the earth, right? And because of that, we're already seeing the effects of these where it's already impacting the sex ratio and making entire nests on this island all the same sex. So this is a cool article that came out, I want to say it's from a few years ago, but just demonstrating the effects of climate change, how the earth is slowly warming up over time, and that it is impacting the animals on the planet right now. Communities are going to be how populations interact with each other. So we are going to need to know these different types of interactions. Are they predation? Are they mutualism? Is it parasitism? Is it commensalism? Competition. So with predation, one of these guys, the predator benefits, while the prey obviously is going to have a negative interaction with this type of relationship. Here we have the hare and the lynx, and that hare is the hare and the lynx. The lynx is going to be the predator and eat up all of the snowshoe hares, but they have a kind of give and take. If the lynx population is too high and there aren't enough hares, snowshoe hares, to support the lynx, then the lynx population is going to drop. And until that snowshoe hare population recovers, like it does here, snowshoe hare population is going back up, then that will allow, now that we have more prey out there, that will allow the lynx population to finally rebound here. So the predator and prey dynamics, it's a give and a take here. But again, predator benefits while the prey has a negative interaction. Parasitism. With parasites, the parasite, this guy, the parasite benefits. The tapeworm, this guy, he benefits. You can't see the filarial worm in this person, but all of this elephantiasis, this swelling, parasite is benefiting. The host of the parasite, not so much. Negative interaction for the host with parasitism. The host does not have a positive outcome. We will talk more about tapeworms and all of that stuff later when we get into flatworms. So commensalism, that's going to be where one population benefits, like the barnacles or these little guys that hang out by the sharks. They are going to benefit, but it doesn't really matter to the other one. It's just it's zero. It's neutral. It's just kind of meh about the whole thing. This shark does not care if those other fish are surrounding him that come along and eat the crumbs off of his meal or her meal. The shark doesn't care. It does not care if those things are around. The whale is not going to care if it's got barnacles on its skin or not. As far as we know, it's okay with it. It's kind of cool with it. It's fine. But the barnacles benefit because it's getting to go all over the ocean in this mobile transportation where it can feed and pull stuff out of the water all over the place. So it's totally a win for the barnacle, and it's a win for these little fish who love to eat up the scraps. When the shark comes along, and takes out chunks of its prey and makes a big old mess, these fish are loving it. So commensalism, one thing benefits, but the other thing, doesn't matter. Another example with commensalism is the tree and the bird. The bird is getting a benefit. It has shelter, it has a place to raise its young. The tree doesn't really care if it has a bird nest in it or not. It's not really benefiting. So the tree, eh, but the bird is it's a win. So commensalism, one thing is going to benefit while the other doesn't really matter. It's pretty neutral. Mutualism. This is going to be where both populations, the clownfish and the anemone, it's a win-win. So with the clownfish are going to be meat eaters. So they're going to bring their food back to their home site in the anemone. So the clownfish are going to bring their food back to their home, hanging out in the anemone. And so the anemone is going to get some of those scraps left over. The anemone is going to get fed because the clownfish is living there. What does the clownfish get out of it? Well, the clownfish gets a free home that other things are not going to bother with because nothing wants to go and mess with the stinging anemone. So it gets a safe place to live. So these are win-win interactions. The bee is helping pollinate the flower. And so it's spreading pollen to pollen to pollen. And so the flower is reproducing thanks to the bee. And the bee gets a benefit because it's getting the yummy, delicious nectar out of this flower. So these are win-wins. This is mutualism where it benefits both. And same for this little bird. And I don't know the name of this little bird, but he is picking scraps out of the crocodile's teeth. So therefore, this croc's teeth are healthier and this croc will live longer and be able to catch prey better if he's got a healthy mouth. And so the bird is winning, getting some scraps out of there, and the croc is also winning. So while he's cooling himself down, aerating his mouth out, the bird comes along and gets some food out of that. So these are mutualism. This is where everybody wins. It's a win-win interaction. Termites are something that if you are a homeowner, you are not excited about termites. These things can really cause some serious damage. But when they're out in the wild doing what they naturally do, they're totally cool because what they help us do is break down organic material. And so they specifically can help break down wood. And wood is a plant material, and plants use polysaccharides, and some of their sugar is stored as starch, like if you eat potatoes, really starchy. And that's how they store some of their energy. And then other sugars aren't storage sugars. Other sugars are used in their cell walls, and that's cellulose. That's a polysaccharide that makes up their cell wall, and that makes plant cell walls pretty tough. And we can't, when we eat in plant material, we can't break down cellulose. We can't. If we chewed up plants cells, if we ate a whole bunch of lettuce, we can break down some of that, but we can't break down the cell walls. We can't break those down completely. We cannot break down cellulose. That's our indigestible fiber. When we're supposed to have a high fiber diet, it is good for you to have both soluble and insoluble, digestible and indigestible fiber. Termites, on the other hand, can break down that cellulose. They can, and it's because they have bacteria and archaea living in their guts. And so it's a win-win relationship. The bacteria and the archaea get a home inside of the termite, and those guys are able to break down cellulose. It's one of the few organisms that can break down cellulose. And it's because of the mutualistic relationship that termites have with the organisms living inside their gut. So termites can eat wood that normally other things cannot eat and digest that thanks to the bacteria and archaea that live in their guts. So again, mutualism, everybody wins. It's a win-win. Lichens are another example. Well, lichens are going to be a type of fungi that are going to have photosynthetic algae. So it's fungi and algae living together. And they are going to have algae that are photosynthetic. So they're going to take the energy from light like normal plants do. And then they're going to use that light, harvest that with CO2 and be able to produce sugars, produce energy. So that photosynthetic algae inside the lichen has a home, just like we were talking about the bacteria and archaea that live inside the termites. They have a home. And so it's a win-win. They have a home, they can photosynthesize to their heart's delight, and then that sugar can then go and help the fungus that is housing those photosynthetic algae in the lichen. Competition is not a win-win. Competition is a lose-lose type of interaction. So we saw where there was competitive exclusion principle, and when you are both competing against each other, whether it's two paramecium species or whatever it is, it's not beneficial to compete. Um, it's going to be something where everybody loses when you are competing. Even if we were talking about male white-tailed deer competing for the females, and you want to be the biggest, baddest buck. When you are competing against the other males, what if you hurt yourself? What if you were in a battle for dominance with the other male and something happens and you injure yourself? Well, now you lost the competition and you don't get to reproduce. So competition is going to be a lose-lose type of interaction. Um, there are lots of different species in an environment and they can compete. They can also figure out different food resources, different um, things for them in their niche that they may be able to speciate. So in Lake Malawi, there are all of these different types of cichlids. If you have been to Georgia Aquarium, or if you've been up to, I want to say they have these up in Chattanooga Aquarium too, you can see all these different things. Even if you go to the pet store, if you've been to your local pet store and you can see all the different types of cichlids. Cichlids are really cool and they come in lots of different colors and stripes and no stripes. And it's because they have speciated and they have lots of different diversity. Some may eat, the insects found on the surface of the water in this lake, and others may go down to a lower level in the water column and they only eat the stuff, the insects that like to eat the plants that are found near the water surface, and they'll eat those insects. Or maybe they're going to eat the insects that are found, slightly down lower on the shallow bottoms, and they eat those guys. So there's lots of different speciation. Even though it's one lake in one area, they can still speciate so they're not competing against each other for the same exact resources. Sometimes you will have a species that is so important that if you removed this species, it will change the entire community. It has that big of an impact on the community. So there are different examples of keystone communities. And one of these is here with sea otters. And sea otters, they like to eat, one of their favorite foods is sea urchins. And so sea urchins are these spiny little boogers, if you've ever seen them. I used to have one in my fish tank at home, but it passed away and I haven't gotten another one since. But they love sea urchins to eat them. And so if we have sea otters in an environment, they're going to keep the sea urchins under control. We're going to have lots of diversity. We can see all the different things. We have these types of fish. We have these types of crabs. We have another type of smaller crab. We have sea stars. Lots of different other types of life here all over the place. Lots of different biodiversity. When sea otters are present, we're going to have the kelp forest. If we don't have sea otters because we hunted them all because we really like their soft furry coats and we hunted them all and we took them out of their environment, then the sea urchins are left to explode. Their population's going to explode. So the sea urchins go crazy and we can see there's not a whole lot of diversity left. The kelp is gone. We got some sea stars roaming around. We got a little bit of this algae growth here and some of these little guys, but none of these crabs or this fish or these other guys here. It's barren without the sea otter. The sea otter was the keystone species. In that example, here we can see our lovely kelp forest. And here it is without. And you can see, I mean, look at all of them. Look at all these sea urchins all over the place, because the sea urchins love to come along and nibble at the kelp. And once they nibble at the kelp floats away. It's not anchored down anymore. Kelp forest is gone. So we need the sea otters. They were a keystone species, and without the sea otter, it severely impacted its ecosystem. Another keystone species that I love, 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 and I think I told y'all before that I took the family on a road trip, and I really should have used my different background from Yellowstone, where we went to go visit this summer. Wolves are a keystone species. I love this video, love it. I make everybody watch it. So please, please click on this video. It's super cool. You can see how when we took out the wolves in Yellowstone, because we hunted them all and we trapped them all, because we went out west, we wanted to farm and cattle, and wolves were predators. And the government used to pay people per pelt for large predators, for wolves, for coyotes. And so we hunted these things out of their environments, and we hunted the wolves. There were no more wolves out west. They were hanging out up in Canada, but that was the only place that we saw them. They weren't safe in the continental US. And so they weren't in Yellowstone. And it wasn't until the 90s, it wasn't until I had started college, I think it was 96. Yeah. When they introduced wolves back. And I remember it was a big stink to put wolves back in Yellowstone, between the environmental groups and the ranchers outside of Yellowstone. It was a big, big debate whether or not these should go back, because they were originally there and because we messed with the environment and they weren't there anymore and we wanted to put them back. What would happen? So this video kind of documents how big of an impact reintroducing wolves into Yellowstone made, and it made a huge impact. Being able to put that one species that you wouldn't think would be that big of a deal if you got rid of it was a huge deal. It was a really big deal throughout the park. So this video kind of documents how important wolves are to the ecosystem. They were very much a keystone species in their environment. So please watch the video. It's super cool. It's not that long. I think it's just a couple minutes, on wolves being keystone species in Yellowstone National Park. Biodiversity. So I had already mentioned this term before, but it is how many species are you going to find in an area. And we said that when we were talking about heterogeneous and homogeneous, heterogeneous were going to be different. There's a whole bunch of different species in an environment. So the biodiversity is rich. Species richness is higher than it would be if everything was homogeneous, where you were just in a palm farm or, a pine forest for the pulp and paper industry. You're not going to find the same amount of species richness. So here we can see the number of species. These are just mammals in this graph right here. But you can see the darker the color, the better the species richness is. So, the Amazon rainforest, all of this right here. Look at the species diversity. And this is just, again, just mammals alone, found in the Amazon basin. Is crazy compared to what we see up in our temperate area and even further up north in the Arctic Circle area. So what's the species richness? How diverse? How many species are you going to find? What is their relative abundance? If there is competition between the populations, it can drive biodiversity up. It may force speciation into different areas, like we were talking about, all those cichlids in the lake. But just because they were stuck in that lake, they speciated and formed different niches within the lake. So it can actually drive up the species richness and the abundance within the environment. So this is going to finish up our ecology chapter and topic. So please check out the outlines and let me know if you have any questions. Finish your lecture quiz on the material. And this week we will start lab. So I will see y'all on Wednesday.